Every 50 years or so, we seem to go through a
My mic was set on pause there.
it
Mics don't pause, Dustin. All
was it was
right.
on it was on mute.
It
It was on
was.
mute.
It was on
All
mute.
right.
That is the word I
So
was looking for.
you're gonna tell me you're gonna inform me a lot tonight in your segment,
Um,
because to be honest with you, um, this is not a subject that I've really had the interest in diving too deeply into.
fair enough, and you would have no reason to.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: this isn't a subject that I ever plan to talk about online. You know, like
Hmm.
it's impolite, and I know that's weird for me to say because like I go around talking about difficult subjects, you know, like uncomfortable subjects. Like I love it, you know, but this is one that just typically isn't worth the trouble that it brings along with it, right? But okay,
Hmm.
so here's the thing: this is I was in. I was inspired to do this. I was motivated. I was hashtag triggered here. Let me size up your window here. Keep my notes out of view. Don't want my dirty secrets out there. So I was watching a video from this fellow right here. Knowing better. I don't know his real name. He has a YouTube channel that I really enjoy. I really like his content. I found him maybe a month ago. I think he puts out a video like every week, and you know how you come across a YouTuber and they have like the short like 15, 20 minute videos, and you can watch like 8 or 10 of them in a row. You know,
Hmm.
and this guy's got like 3, 4 years of content, so like you know, I can fall into knowing better holes, you know, and I really enjoy his content, and he mostly stays away from politics. They're more like kind of educational, like sociology, and you know, I like I said, and he seems like a cool guy too. I feel like I could sit down and have a nice beer with him. He seems a little more. He described himself as reserved. You know, look at his room here. He in his early videos, he comes off as sterile. You know, that's what I would say. He's starting to get some art and stuff in the background, but at that point, it's just at the very beginning, it was like a concrete room too. You know, that's got to suck. Anyway, I've lived in much worse myself. But anyway, I like his stuff. But I'm gonna show you the little clip, take another guy's advice on what the big, you know, let you know what the big disagreement is, what motivated me. And you see that right there popped up. Just the fact that he's
Yeah.
comparing us to Nazis fucking gets me in the first place. But it's right here at the 1624 or so mark. He says something like this.
Confederate statues, but bringing up the fact that they lost the war isn't one of them. So what is a Confederate general statue for? If you said the Southern identity, you need to ask yourself what that means. Because unlike the Scottish, the Southern identity is rooted in racism. Thinking that the
This is the conclusion of the video. You know, you got like another minute left, and his big punch at the end is that the Southern identity is rooted in racism. Basically, if you celebrate, even if it's not with this flag, right? If to celebrate Southern identity is to celebrate racism in extent, and I think that's a very prejudiced and bigoted way to think. But I take it as a challenge. One, a lot of people don't quite understand what the war is about. Yes, it was about slavery. Succeeding, leaving the United States was about slavery. The war was about the Union, and we'll get into that a little bit. And I want to say here too, I am not in any way supporting the Confederacy. Okay, I do not believe that any race is superior. I believe that different demographics, ethnicities are different in a number of ways. I see them more like, you know, the old Street Fighter games or like even like Mario Kart. Each character is designed for a way to play it to succeed, right? They're
Mhm.
different, but in the end, they're all equal in a different way, if that makes sense. That's the way I see
Sure.
it, more than like everyone is the fucking same and all the races and all peoples are the same. That's ludicrous to me. And we'll get into all of this, but I'm gonna start this video over at the very beginning. Do I have anything else? Yeah, not defending racism, not defending the Confederacy, and I'm not defending slavery, or as they called it, the peculiar institution. But these things are going to come up. And
Who called it that?
It was a euphemism that was very popular leading up to the Civil War.
Okay.
When, like, you know, instead of saying slavery, they would say the peculiar institution.
Okay.
Which is a way of admitting. And, you know, before we get too deep into this, I don't support the Confederacy. It's arguable whether or not they had the right to leave. But I also don't think that we would still have slaves by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, the British shut it down in a different way. They stopped the ships themselves rather than going and killing the people that had slaves. I think we would have followed a track similar to Brazil. And instead of stretching west, we would have stretched further south, creating like an agricultural empire that would eventually modernize just like Brazil did, but would ultimately not be a world power because of being late to the game. Anyway, and of course the world wars would all come out different and all that, but this is an alternative history video. So let's start this guy's video over. One last caveat, and I have to do like 30 of these because, you know, else I'm a fucking bigot or a racist, right? It doesn't matter.
Well, you are anyways, so.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. We're going to talk a lot about group statistics, right? Like IQ and crime, and the context that I'm always talking about these in is that you cannot judge the individual by the group, okay? You have to take each person on as an individual and then see what they have to bring and judge them as a human being, right? That's the way that we're all equal. Right, we should all be judged as individuals. It doesn't matter what other, mostly white but somewhat mixed, and no one knows why or what. It doesn't matter what those people are doing. It doesn't affect me. You're right. Take me as who I am as a person and judge me. And I take every black person, every, you know, Mexican or whatever as individuals and see what they have to offer and who they are. So that's the context that I'm talking about this in. All right. I in no way condone group judgment or group violence or anything like that. So with all those caveats out of the way, let's get into this. This will be my first response video. So let's see how it goes.
Every 50 years or so, we seem to go through a racial upheaval in this country. 50 years after the founding of this country was the Missouri Compromise, which just sort of kicked the slavery can down the road until the ultimate clash in the 1860s, the Civil War. But it obviously didn't end there. 50 years later, in the 1910s and 20s, was the golden age of the KKK. This is when most of the Confederate statues that we're arguing about now went up. Another 50 years.
A little context there. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose, but it seems to insinuate that the statues went up because of the rise in the KKK and whatever else at that time. It's more so like 1910s and 1920s. That's the Gilded Age, leading up to the Great Depression. And you also have World War I going on in that time period, 1914 to 1918, unless I'm mistaken. And it's a very patriotic time. And we're going to find out, actually, in just a moment, why military victories would actually bring up a pride in the Confederacy in this type of situation. So let's let him continue.
Went by and we had the Civil Rights Movement with Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers, and the Confederate flag.
Oh, yeah. And most of the statues are copies. New technology came about to make the statues cheaper to make as well, right? So instead of chiseling out, we started making molds, that type of technology. So all sorts of monuments were created during this time period. And we actually finished monuments in D.C. that had been stopped previously because we had the money at that point.
Before the 1950s and 60s, the Confederate flag wasn't really a thing. And here we are again, 50 years.
Okay. To say that the Confederate flag wasn't a thing to the 1950s and 60s, that it went away until the civil rights movement come back, is absolutely not true. And I also take issue with him calling it the Confederate flag. We'll get into that again later, but he talks about that himself, so I'll let him bring it up. So I'm going to bring up this article right now from the Nation History. What was the Confederate flag doing in Cuba, Vietnam, and Iraq? So I'm going to skip down. By the way, this is World War II. Here with the Confederate flag, a bomber going over Japan. Skip down to this highlighted section. But like many discussions of American conservatism, this account misses the role of endless war played in sustaining domestic racism. Starting around 1898, which is just a few years, like the next generation, right? So not the ones that fought the Civil War, but their children, okay? Well before it became an icon of redneck backlash, the Confederate battle flag served for half a century as an important pennant in the expanding American empire and a symbol of national unification, not polarization. And what he's saying here is that it was, let me do the next paragraph here. It was a reconciled army that moved out into the world after the Civil War, an unstoppable combination of Northern law, bureaucratic command and control, industrial might and technology, and Southern spirit. An exaltation of military ideals and virtues, including valor, duty, and honor. Both law and spirit had their dark sides, leading to horrors committed because of either the very nature of the American empire, the genocide of Native Americans, for example, or the war in Southeast Asia. The particular passions of some of its soldiers. And both law and spirit had their own flags. So 40% of the United States military is from Dixie, right? The old Confederacy right now. And it's almost always been that way. We are one of the lesser populated parts of the country, but we join the military in much higher levels, and we tend to fill the lower or the fighting ranks.
Okay.
Right? So starting the very next generation, after the people that actually fought in the Civil War died. So when we invade Cuba during the Spanish and American War, during World War I, during World War II, during Korea, during Vietnam, Southern soldiers were allowed to and very often flew the what they call the rebel flag. When I was growing up, it was called the rebel flag. We didn't call it the Confederate flag, and we'll get into that a little more later as well. But it did not go away. It was always a symbol of what it turned into a symbol at that point of what we were bringing to the table of the Southern fighting pride. And that'll be explained in just a moment. And it's out of order because he's doing the video, and I have to keep up with him. So here we go.
Years later with Black Lives Matter and neo-Nazis. So how the heck did we get here?
I love this, by the way. Get the joke here. Think you should know better than doing. Got a dry sense of humor, I dig.
Before we get into current events, it's important to take a step back and look at the overall picture. Neo-Nazis and the KKK have existed for decades, but they're much more prominent and have much more support now, and something must have caused that. And it wasn't just Trump. So first, let's define some terms. The big picture is xenophobia, which is the fear or dislike of anyone different from you. Under xenophobia is racism, sexism, and Islamophobia. These are all different.
We're not going to split that here, Dave, but we're going to know.
I was like,
there. We're not going to do it, but it's there, and we know it's wrong. All right.
Okay. It's a made-up word. Anyway,
yeah, we're going to let it slide.
Different, but they sometimes overlap in the case of Islamophobia, which is usually coupled with racism against Arabs. Even though, as I've covered before, there are Arab Christians, Arab Jews, Arab everything else. But unlike disliking a religion or ideology, racism is a dislike of a biological group of people. Yes, you heard that correctly. Race is absolutely biological. It's as much of a social construct as planets are. Even though it's completely arbitrary, we use certain physical characteristics to group together and define them. So let's define race. When talking about human beings, it's a group of people with a shared set of common physical characteristics. Physical characteristics.
He's dead on
that
with
is
all this.
Darker skin, different shaped eyes, You know what they are, okay? Let me be clear, there is no evidence that race is connected to things like intelligence, criminality, or any other behavior. It's entirely physical.
And this is the part of the video that I really wish I could ignore, Dave. But I'm not going to. And this is going to be a very uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people. And I want to stress that take everyone on as individuals before we get into this. So the claim he just made was that that your biology doesn't hold any weight on either your intelligence or your criminality. Okay. Now, criminality is somewhat arguable, but to say that that there is no that biology doesn't have anything to do with intelligence is pretty ludicrous. So,
well, hang on. People like Sam Harris say that biology certainly does have a lot to do with your criminality.
We'll get into that a little bit.
Okay.
We'll get into that a little bit. So, first, when you're talking about intelligence, the best measure of intelligence is IQ. Okay.
Yes.
And if you're willing to deny IQ science, you might as well throw out half of, if not all of, social science altogether. Right.
Okay.
It is very long and very deeply studied, and we use it for everything from job placement to what you do in the military to whether or not we can put you in the electric chair. Right. It shows. There's a couple different kinds of IQ tests, but they tend to lead to the same conclusion, right? There's one that we're going to use in the West, which is, they test everything: your reading comprehension, your math skills, your vocabulary, your ability to predict, upcoming shapes and that type of thing. And then they put all those together, and that gives your IQ score. When you go to other countries, they mostly rely on that second half where they give you patterns and you have to predict the pattern. That way it's not culturally weighted.
Okay.
Right? Because IQ kind of boils down to your ability to assess and adapt to a given subject or situation. Right?
Problem solving.
Right. So these are the IQ classifications here. They at the very bottom, at the extremely low, is 69 and below. That's what they used to call, like completely
Down
mentally
syndrome.
retarded.
Okay.
Just not you cannot function in society.
Okay.
From 70 to 79, you have borderline, which is like Forrest Gump was right on that line. For a reference, fictional reference. Low average is 80 to 89. Average is 90 to 109. So average centers at 100. And they actually moved the scale to keep it on 100.
Okay.
Right, because IQ actually has raised several points since World War II. And we've had to move the scale to go along with it. And there's a few reasons for that. It's called the Flynn effect. If anyone's more interested, Google Flynn effect, read about it. It's fascinating. So high is 110 to 119. So these are people that are going to be able to hold more complex jobs and do more problem solving. You get up to the 120 and the 129. These are college professors, authorities in their fields, and then you have the very superior, the genius, the way out there. So that's how intelligence breaks down. So when you look at race and IQ in America, and I've overlapped these. I'm going to change the opacity here, and I'll bring it back. Oh, that's the wrong one. There we go. Boop. All right. So like this is the uncomfortable chart here. At the very end, we have East Asians who center right here around 110, okay? And they're not on the chart here, but Ashkenazi Jews center around 115.
Okay.
Okay. White population centers around 100. Your Hispanic population centers around 90, 95. And then your black population around 80, 85. Now I'm gonna kind of make this transparent again because it gives us a grid so we can better see. It's the wrong one again. I'm gonna get this, guys. Is this a little? Did it again? There we go.
But there could be other factors that
we're gonna get into that.
Okay.
We're gonna get into that actually. So I'm just dividing this, and what it shows here. Instead of breaking it down to 5, we've centered it on 100. So, you know, you got your slow, your below average, your above average, and your gifted, right? To break it into a little more easy to understand graph here. And, okay. What's interesting about these is when it's not just where the average is, but what's happening on the extremes, right? So when you look on the end of gifted here, what you're going to find is that your Jews are going to fill that, and then they fill the universities, and they fill these higher ranks in banks. You know, that's why they find themselves in such lucrative situations, because they're highly adaptive and intelligent, right? It's not some giant conspiracy.
Oh, I thought it was because they were money hungry, like Shylocks
running the world, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the white supremacists say, but they're fucking gifted. They're good at it, and they stick together and they work together. Then after that is Asians, and you see that now that they're moving to our country, they're filling our universities, and it's happening in your country too, because they are gifted. They really are. And then white people are very average, and that's also what you see, and down, and it gets less comfortable on that end. Now, and if before we say that this is strictly a cultural thing happening in the West, they also line up with global scores. You see that there's a rise in scores coming from Africa into the West. But I would say there's a couple of reasons for that. We don't get a random sampling of people coming from Africa. We get the people that have the intelligence, the capability, and the willingness to migrate across the world, right? A much higher percentage of blacks in America actually migrated here than people realize. And by the way, they perform just as good, if not better, than the blacks in the United States. Even though on average they test better, those that migrate to the United States do the same, if not better. It's a complaint among the black community, actually, that black immigrants do better than the average black students. If you want to look into that as well. And like I said, man, this is really unfortunate. And this is another thing to keep in mind. When you go back to that chart, there are gifted black people. There are gifted Hispanic people. There are quite a few of them, just not quite in the same numbers. And they're out there, and we need to find them, and they should be in positions of power and authority, and should be using their intelligence in their countries or wherever they want to be, right? So I'm 1,000% behind that. Another thing is that intelligence is in no way the measure of a man. Or of a people, right? It doesn't say how, loving or industrious or in any number of things, like, are you, a good family man or anything like that. That's another thing I think why people get so offensive over this is they mistake this as the value of a person. Now, IQ is the highest indicator of economic success, followed by industriousness and followed by openness. So those come together to make a successful person or a successful group, like high rates of that. I know it's terrible. But we were going to get into, I had the Wikipedia page for.
Yeah, but I'm
gonna have to look it up.
Wouldn't you think that I know it shows Africa, so like colonization, not having the proper not having Western education there for that long, diet.
Now diet and things like that, and we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into heritability versus environment and how they play a role. And this has actually been very deeply studied. So I'm going to share this window. Oh, there it is. Window, heritability of IQ. Okay. So the research of heritability on IQ implies from the similarity of IQ in closely related persons the proportion of variance of IQ among individuals in a study population that is associated with genetic variance within that population. And what that means is this provides a maximum estimate of genetic versus environmental influence on the phenotypic variation, right? And that's the development and how the genes express themselves, like which genes and how they express. That the population as environmental factors may be correlated with genetic factors or heritability. In this sense, refers to the genetic contribution to variance within a population in a specific environment. So I'll tell you what, a better way to understand this is, before we get to these numbers. So we know that addiction is somewhat heritable, right? You know, it runs in families, right? And it's somewhat genetic. Like we know that there are, sets of genes that can lead one to be to be an addict, but they have to also hit an environment to be activated.
Sure,
right?
they're more predisposed.
Right,
predisposed. Yeah, fuck, I'm losing my line.
So that's a similar way to how IQ heritability works, right? So you have to have the genes, and then you have to have the environment as well, right? So you have to. We don't know what the genes are, but you have to have a cluster of genes to lead one to be intelligent, and then you have to get to live a life, have the experience, have the education, in order to bring them up. So that's another reason why I think Africans. I hate the term blacks, to be honest. I think that's another reason why they do better when they move to the West, is that they're in a better environment to better enact those genes. So like another way to explain that variance, Dave, was like, okay, me. I have the set of genes to have very dark skin, right?
Yes.
But all of my skin is not that dark, right? So I pull up my sleeve, and it's actually very white. Because my sleeve is in a different environment than my forearm is, which is much darker, right?
Sure.
It gets the environment that it needs to bring those genes out. It gets the sun rays. It gets the bombardment of radiation to bring them out. And so it's a similar thing here. So this is how much of it is the genes and how much of it is the environment. So that's what we're talking about here with heritability. I think that's the layman's way to explain it. Does that make sense? Now that I use all three of those analogies together? All right.
Sure.
So in other words, heritability is the mathematical estimate that indicates an upper bound to how much of a trait's variation can be attributed to genes. See? So how much of my darkness is genes and how much is environment is what this is about. There has been significant controversy in the academic community about the heritability of IQ since research on the issue began in the late 19th century. In other words, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. It doesn't matter when a study started, like what generation of people started it. Does the study hold today in today's science? And they do. And that's why they're still here and they can't be refuted, or they would be refuted. That's the one thing about a really good cited academic Wikipedia page, is that if there's a good study to fight it, people come in and put it in. And I recommend people to read this entire page. We're not going to.
I watched a documentary a while back called "The Last Taboo of Science," and it was a black guy that made the documentary on the bell curve and race. And
that's what we were talking about earlier, is the bell curve and the quarters.
Yeah. He made a very a very even-handed video about it. Yeah.
I'll have to check that out, man.
Yeah, it's called The Last Taboo of Science.
So to get into the meat of this, the heritability of IQ for adults is between 57 and 73%.
Okay, right. So that's super low.
Around let's say 65%. Just take a nice middle ground. 65% of how intelligent you are is based on your genetic makeup, and the rest is based on your environment.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that's super low. I thought you said somebody's IQ was between 50 and never mind.
No.
I didn't hear it.
The heritability of IQ for adults is between 57 and 63 and 73. Yeah. So let's say 65% of your intelligence is based on your genetic makeup, and the other is based on your diet, your education, your ability to sit down and actually fucking study. You know.
Sure.
And this is the other. And by the way, to put it on the screen, those are the papers from 2003. This is not ancient science.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the 80% is from 2015. The 86%, 87%. You know, I was saying 50. Okay, that's what somebody's. Oh, in adults, it's much higher. We'll get into that. Genome-wide association studies have identified inherent genome sequences differences that account for 20 to 50% of the genetic variation that contributes to heritability. So they have found some of the genes that lead to it. This is the interesting part. IQ goes from being weakly correlated with genetics for children to being strongly correlated with genetics for late teens and adults. The heritability of IQ increases with age and reaches an asymptote of 18 to 20 years of age and continues at that level well into adulthood. And this is based off of twin studies, the Wilson effect. So what that means, Dave, is that when your child is in school, when they're nice and young, before their late teens, you can have a lot of environmental effect on them to raise their testing scores, right?
Okay.
But how intelligent they are as an adult in the end is far more based on genetics and isn't affected. So we invest all this money in kids in school, and it helps them perform better in school, but it has very little effect on making them more intelligent or capable adults, because it levels off. And we figured this out by using twin studies, right? So you have one twin that is raised in very good environment, good education, good food, good parents, and another in a less capable environment, and the one from the good family will do better when they're young, but they're both eventually end up with a very similar. They will be much more closely correlated than two strangers would be, because it's that much of a genetic change. So when Knowing Better says here that that IQ isn't based on, or intelligence isn't based on race at all, that's just demonstrably wrong, or that's not what science says at this moment. And if it changes, I'll be happy to go with it. And I wish it wasn't true, and I'd love to change it. But it is what it is, man. It is what it is. And the other end of that, he brought up crime, and this is the FBI crime stats, and they're not pretty. This breaks down by population. The black population in the United States, and this is going to be more important later in the video, commits about 50% of the murders, largely within their own community. And that's hard to say that's faked, right? We're not producing fake dead bodies, and we're not ignoring dead white bodies, right? Mm-hmm. So about 50% of murders are black, about a third of rapes and violent crimes in general, armed robbery, that type of thing. White people tend to drink and drive more often. They have more domestic problems, or at least they call the police about more domestic problems, that type of thing. And as far as that connecting to genetics, you would have to say how much, like what personality traits leads one to be more likely to commit crimes or not. And impulsiveness would be a big one. Amounts of testosterone has a lot to do with it. Another thing that people don't consider in the United States is that the black population is a very young population, while the white population is aging, and a lot of crimes are committed while you're young, right? Like you were a bad motherfucker when you were between 15 and 30, right? Mm-hmm. Right, and that's very normal, right? So the white population on average is much older, and so is our Asian population is much older, so they're naturally going to be committing less crimes anyway. But there have been studies that show that of course, black people have more testosterone, and testosterone is connected to impulsive and violent behavior. That very small percent, I'd say there. And there have also been studies that show that some races, there's disparity in races about delaying gratification, which also would prevent one from committing crimes, right? So what they do is they take children and they tell them you can have one mushroom now, or you can have 2 mushrooms later, and see what they choose. And it doesn't all come out even, right? And that kind of correlates with the crime stats as well. So probably less so than intelligence is, but we don't have the studies, and I don't know how they would study those quite the same as, we don't have the IQ equivalent of criminality, right?
Yeah.
So it's you won't get, but that's the best I can say about that. So I feel like he knows these things because he's a bright dude, man. You should watch his videos. I recommend everyone to watch his videos. He's really good. I think it's he got in some shit over this video when he made it a year ago with what he said already. He couldn't swing. He's being called a communist and a Nazi in the same comment thread. If you read through it. And you're seeing, keep watching the video because he's coming out very right wing so far, right? Race is real. Race is real.
No, I didn't.
He said race is biological and real.
Well, yeah, it is though.
Yeah, but that's not a left-wing position.
Races do have different likelihoods of different diseases, such as cystic fibrosis, more common in white people, and sickle cell anemia, more common in black people. This doesn't mean that any race is better or worse than any other. It just means that we are different, and these differences are biological and genetic in origin. There is no white gene or black gene or Asian gene. It's a set of common characteristics, not universal. There are black people with blue eyes and white people with dark skin. It's as biological as your hair color. Your natural hair color. We're all human, but we are all different. Nobody is better or worse, but we're different, okay? Look, there are many ways to fight racism, but claiming that race is not biological and it's just a social construct is not one of them. But calling things that aren't really racism racist doesn't help either. Like stereotypes. Stereotypes exist for a reason, and that reason is cognitive ease. We all do it. Every single one of you, including me, no matter how hard we try not to. When you first meet someone, you try to figure out what they are, whether it's their gender, race, religion, or whatever. And then your brain brings up a set of characteristics about that group. For example, you find out that they are Jewish or Muslim, and your brain brings up the fact that you probably shouldn't offer them bacon. There are Jews and Muslims who do eat bacon, but most of the time, they don't. And that's why your brain brings up that fact. Most stereotypes are harmless and just help you interact with that person. Some of them are harmful, especially when they incite violence or bigotry.
Okay, I'll stop there. So he's absolutely right here about stereotypes, and the thing that makes them evolutionarily advantageous is that they are largely correct. Most stereotypes speak of a general truth about the group, right? But of course, you do not treat individuals by the group. That is the only way you can navigate this without, I feel like, being crossing a line.
Yes.
And that's what he's talking about here. And I agree with him again. So I back him up on that again.
But most of them are just kind of funny, and that's why they're the topic of jokes. Having stereotypes is not racist. Think about this. When you're calling out someone for being racist, are you calling out the person who thinks that all black people are drug-dealing criminals? Or do you verbally berate the person who just made a watermelon joke? Odds are, most of the time, you're talking to the watermelon guy. You're making them feel horrible and possibly defensive for something that literally everyone does, when they're not really the racist that you should be calling out. Maybe you think that the jokes are harmful. Okay, but thinking that all stereotypes are harmful simply isn't, because everyone has them, because it is socially and evolutionarily advantageous to have them. Speaking of which, racism isn't learned.
What'd you say?
Racism isn't learned. Hatred is learned. Racism is innate. A common saying is that no baby is born racist.
I would change his word here and say, and he'll explain this, in-group preference is innate. racism is learned. I would shift his terms.
Yeah.
Right? Because racism is hatred. It's based off hatred. Right? Racism isn't an in-group preference. It's a distaste. It's a believing that you're superior. To prefer something isn't to believe it's superior, or to hate things that aren't that. So
racist. Well, that isn't true. Babies understand morality as young as 3 months old. At 6 months old, they will start to show a preference and bias towards people with similar tastes and views as them, regardless of their morality. It's as simple as liking a stuffed animal who prefers the same food as them, even if that stuffed animal is a jerk to other stuffed animals.
Okay, and why he brings up studies based on race as well as preferences like food, and I think that's a very important thing to note here, that we have in-group preferences, but race is only one of them. And as you age, Dave, think of how many groups you fit into, right? So you're a podcaster, you're a gamer, you're a Canadian, you're a man, you are white, you're married, you have children, you have an autistic child. What kind of music do you like?
Rock, techno,
that's
lots of different
There's
things.
other groups. You also made techno. That's another group, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm not a gamer. Not a gamer.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a gamer, right? So these are all vectors of intersectionality. To throw that out there, these are all different. These are all different in-group preferences that you hold, right?
Yeah.
So race is only one of them. It's only one of them. Right, and I don't think it's much more harmful than the other ones. Like I'll tell you what, man, I have a lot more in common. Like when I was touring with my metal band and we go play, man, like the black kids in the metal shows were fucking super great, man. I prefer them over like back a spitting redneck most any day, like random rednecks, you know. Have a lot more in common with them. And as far as that goes, a lot of the black kids from the neighborhood I'm from an all black neighborhood. We'll talk about that as well. I have a lot that I get along with them on culturally. While we don't fit together on a racial line, we fit together on a lot of other lines. All right.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. And back to the video.
I always include my sources down below, but I'll also include a link to videos which talk about these experiments, including the stuff.
No, because you haven't.
And I know that sounds ridiculous to equate to racism, but it shows that we have an innate, unlearned, base programming bias and preference towards people who are similar to us. And this bias only grows as we grow. By the time we're able to recognize ourselves in the mirror, we will start to show preference and bias towards people who also look like us. Babies as young as 15 months old will start to show racial bias, more specifically in-group racial bias. They will self-segregate and choose playmates of the same race as them. And since babies understand morality and fairness, they will completely throw that out the window and prefer adults who distribute toys unfairly as long as it favors their own racial group. And this is across races, by the way. Since 3-month, 6-month, and 15-month-old babies don't yet have the language capacity to learn hatred, this shows that they have an innate racial bias and preference. And there's an evolutionary reason for that.
I would like to see him compare that to like food preferences as well.
Well, hang on. I don't know if they're necessarily okay. they're definitely showing preference to people that are like them. Mm-hmm. But this is, I don't think they conceptualize that it's race.
No.
Right? Like they don't have the ability to conceptualize that. I think it goes back to tribalism, right?
Yeah, which is in-group preference. It's another word for the same thing.
Yes, but I think that is look, I'm not a biologist and I'm not a sociologist, so I'm gonna step out of my expertise of framing. I go out on a limb here and say that in a certain time on this planet, it would be advantageous for your tribe not to like people that didn't look like you. Yeah. Because chances are they were there to rape your women, take your shit,
and they would also bring disease.
and disease.
Yeah, and
So-
he's about to say that actually.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. You did it again, Dave. 2 videos in a row. God damn it.
Well, I haven't
Back in
watched this video
I know,
before.
I know.
Today, other groups and races, people who didn't look or act like you, probably had different immune systems and different pathogens than you. So it was
He didn't say the raping and
advantageous to
killing, but-
stay away from them. Now, obviously, that isn't true anymore.
They would eat each other as well.
But for tens and even hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, it was. And patches to our innate base programming takes longer than 50 or 100 years. Now, these are babies, so we wouldn't really call these biases and preferences racism. It's just a funny little quirk. But we would definitely call it racist if they were an adult. And the thing is, these weird, quirky preferences extend into adulthood. You may not think that you're racist. You may even be violently opposed to racism.
A little bit of in-group preference is fine. A lot of it, I would say, would be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like you gotta be lying to yourself if you say you don't have any preference for people that A, look like you, B, enjoy the same things you do. You know, like, you don't look like me, Dave, and we're not exactly the same race, but we have a lot of other things in common.
Sure.
You know, and it overrides that by a long shot.
For sure.
Talk about things that don't matter. Anyway.
Racism. But here's an example. You are told to take a seat, and there are 4 chairs. In the far right seat is someone of your race, and in the far left seat is someone of another race. Almost always, without thinking about it, you will sit next to the person of the same race as you. Is that racism, or is it just a vestige of the same racial preference that we laugh about in babies? There are many legitimate ways to fight racism, but saying that racism is learned isn't one of them. Hatred is learned. Having those thoughts, biases, and preferences is natural. It doesn't make you a racist or a bigot unless you act on them. It's the same as sex. When you see someone who's attractive, you might initially have some thoughts that are best left as thoughts. They are natural to have, but as soon as you act on those thoughts, that's when society has to step in. The thoughts themselves are not wrong, and telling someone that they're a terrible person for having them doesn't help. That makes them defensive rather than open-minded. We need to teach that it's natural to have these thoughts, and here's how to overcome them. Not that you're a terrible person for having them in the first place. Likewise, coming up with new terms like microaggression and...
Are you wondering how this is going to lead to fuck the South?
I'm just kind of. I have a problem with what he said with the thought thing.
Go on.
Okay, so like if his thought is, I would like to have sex with that woman, that's okay.
Yeah.
If his thought is, I would like to rape her and eat her face, that's not really seek help.
Seek help.
If his thought is, that child looks good to me, he's a danger. Because those thoughts, those types of thoughts,
you know what? Actually, act on. Well, now that you mention it, I act on most of my thoughts. Like, there's very rarely do I feel like I need to restrain myself.
Like, those types of thoughts do lead to.
That is an interesting observation, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, go on. Go on.
In order to say,
Halfway
you're not
through his video,
really
not
racist,
quite.
you're just a little racist. Doesn't help either. It only muddies the water and makes people who aren't really racist defensive. Or cultural appropriation. Many of us were brought up learning about and appreciating other cultures. We would have days in school where we dressed up and celebrated other cultures' holidays. And that's great, but now we're being told that we can't eat certain foods or dress in a certain way because that's not part of our heritage, and that's cultural appropriation. You can't celebrate diversity and appreciate multiculturalism and be against cultural appropriation at the same time. These things are at odds with each other, and when you do that, it makes people just throw up their hands and say forget it, and retreat into their in-group where they won't be told what to do or how to think. And things like Black Lives Matter don't help either. The movement itself is fine, but let's admit that's a terrible name choice.
Okay. Some people have a problem with the name. I know, Dave, I'm going to keep this short. Some people have a problem with the name. The name is the least of the problems. And if you, Mr. Knowing Better, or anyone else wants to come argue with me about Black Lives Matter, come at me, bro. But the problem with Black Lives Matter, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone, right? Me personally, has nothing to do with their name and has everything to do with their basic claim is that America is so racist that the government lets its cops gun down innocent little black boys that ain't done nothing wrong and should have never been shot, and there was no provoking, and the government never does anything about it in almost a genocidal type of way. And I think that's a tall claim, and they can't back it up. And their fucking connections to, radicals and domestic terrorists like, what was her name? Assata Shakur, right? That's my problem. That people that they quote and idolize fled after murdering cops, escaped prison, fled to Cuba, and took fucking refugee status under Castro, and that is their idol. That is the problem with them, dude. Oh yeah, and that they burn down fucking neighborhoods and shit based off of this conspiracy theory. If you look at the crime rates, the violent crime stats match up with the police shooting stats, right?
Yes.
So you actually have a strong correlation between interactions with police officers and fatal shootings with police officers. And there have been studies that have shown that black people resist arrest more often, and that black people attack cops more often, and that black cops are more likely to shoot black suspects than white cops are. Go ahead. And I can back off.
Well, there's a study out of Harvard.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, and so the thing is that you're more likely to end up shot and killed if you're a white person if it comes to the point where the guns are drawn, but you're more likely to get physically roughed up if you're a black person.
Now that I believe.
So like the cops are more likely to fuck with you as well if you're a black person.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, and I'm not talking about on a per capita basis, because obviously more whites are killed by the cops in the States because there's a fuck ton more of them than there are black people. I'm just talking about what more likely to happen if a cop pulls a gun is the white person dies. Anyways. I'm super racist now too.
It rubbed off on you, Dave. All right, back to the.
You know, my problem is with all this is that, like 2 years ago, man, I was just like, none of this shit. Like, I just didn't care. I don't care. I still don't care about race. Like, I just don't care.
I don't care about race. Well, okay, I don't care except for there are movements based on what I call the bigotry of the gaps, the racism of the gaps, right?
Sure.
Where, white people blame the Jews because Jews do better. White people blame Asians because Asians do better. Fucking blacks blame whites because whites do better. You know what I mean? Like, and it's, I actually think that it's the result of a meritocracy rather than some conspiracy of each race holding down the other or one holding down everyone else. Right? It's just bullshit to me. And in order to fight these ideas, you have to know these things for one. Okay. And on the other hand of this, when actual white supremacists, and I'm not a white supremacist, and I'm not a white nationalist, right? People watching this don't know me, when you show up and say, these are things that no one tells you. Why don't they tell you these things? What are they hiding? They're lying to you. I'm telling you the truth, right? It's alluring to people. If you go back to their catalog, you'll hear me talking about stealing the wind from their sails. I talked about it on the last episode, and this is part of it. Like, we have to look at the uncomfortable truths so that we can understand reality. And we know that, man, life is uncomfortable. It's not fucking fair.
Is it possible for you to be a white supremacist?
No, I'm not even white.
Yeah,
I remember joking with an ex-girlfriend of mine who was pretty racist. Like, you think I could join the Confederacy? Like, I have people that fought in the Civil War. I have a book about it. And she goes, like, no, honey, you're not white. Like, you can't join their shit. So back to the video. We're 9 minutes into an 18-minute video.
Because while not its intention, it implies that Black lives matter more than any other race.
I'm filling
which
the
is why
commenter.
some white people have a problem with it. It means that Black lives matter just as much as any other race's lives. But that's not really a catchy hashtag. Which brings us to white privilege.
Ooh.
White privilege is obviously a thing, but it's a terrible term, which is why a lot of white people have a hard time seeing it. When you tell someone to check their privilege, their first reaction will be defensive. What white privilege? It kind of implies that they get something extra, like a monthly check or a discount at Walmart. When they don't feel like that, they likely fall into one of two categories. They either just went through several bouts of unemployment and financial uncertainty during the recession, so when you say that they have privilege, they think they must be the exception to that privilege. They obviously haven't had it easy. Or they're well off and they worked hard through college to get to where they are, so clearly they don't have privilege either. A good example of what is meant by white privilege is that cops are far less likely to shoot you.
We just went over that.
Yeah, that's not true.
There's a third category that this guy doesn't consider, okay? You know, and I'll make a bit of a concession here. In-group preference is a thing, and while there are several other vectors, race is one of those, and it's one of the most obvious things you can see off the top, okay? It's literally on your face. So there could be something called majority privilege that, you know, class privilege would be a brother of
I often speak about majority privilege.
Okay. So, but here's an interesting thing about this. Let me find this interesting little map here, Dave. Let's zoom way out on this. Have I ever shown you this? I've probably sent you screenshots.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Okay. So, for those playing the home game, I don't know what's wrong with the middle here. There it goes. This is the 2010 census block data, and it gives a dot for each person of each race right here. Okay, so they say if you live in America, you have white privilege. But here's the thing. People are from America. You're born in America, but you don't live in America. Okay? And as far as that goes, even if you're, let's say, from the New England here, you don't live in New England. You're from New England, right? So I'm from Alabama. Okay, so I'm from the United States, and the United States is majority white. Alabama is majority white. But where did I live? Let's zoom in here. I'm from Birmingham. I'm from a particular part of Birmingham, right over here, with these green dots. Okay, so this is the uppity part of town that I could visit and go watch a movie. Maybe take a date out there, act like I have a little class, and then I take my ass right back home. You know, my mother's business, where the guy just yelled at her about being a redneck, is right over here.
Okay.
Okay. I went to school over in this area. I actually grew up. In this little block right here. It doesn't even get a name or streets or anything. That's Wylam. Okay.
Okay.
So if there's a majority privilege, this is where I got my first jobs. This is where I went to school. This is where I met everybody. Okay.
And it's majority
privilege?
black.
Who has majority privilege
Majority
here?
black. Yeah.
Okay. This is where I live. This is my lived experience. I like to talk about lived experience in the social justice left. This is my lived experience. Okay. So not only do those other two categories that the guy mentioned have a damn good argument, but this is a reality as well. Okay. So you really can't call that white privilege. Okay. And here's the thing. I can bring you up news articles where right there in Birmingham, they wanted to invest in the city, bring in some nice apartments and some new businesses. And they held a town hall meeting where several people stood up and said they didn't want to bring in the apartments or the investments because they didn't want to bring more white people to Birmingham. So who is, who has the power in that situation as well? Let's get back to the video.
You might think that's the norm, and it should be. You might think that white people don't get
white
anything
majority's the
extra.
norm,
They get
but
base
not for
level.
everyone.
The problem is that minorities get treated like less than that. So if you understand that, you can understand what white privilege is supposed to mean. As I've said, that's not how it comes off.
Yeah, I gotta piss real bad. But...
All right, we'll just hit another break here. We're at 10 minutes even.
God, these people are so evil. Why can't America wake up and meet them? Donald Trump's not perfect, but he doesn't want to hurt you and your family. Hillary and Obama want to make you poor and pathetic. We have all their white papers. They hate you. They hate prosperity. They hate God. They hate children. And goddamn them, they all. We're going to find the lever to beat these people, and they're going to be beaten. Look at her shark face. Have to look at her with that demon face. That's a frickin' demon. We're going to have President Linda Blair, people, and I'm not going to go along with it.
bound to my broken feet. A victory for my oppressors. Was there no warning sign for me? It's not how we envisioned. They're growing quite unkind. We failed our desperate missions and lost our fucking minds.